Welcome to Finding Your Way with Lori and Tonya. I'm Lori.
Tonya.
So we both follow the work of Brene Brown, and if you don't know who she is, I don't know what rock you've been under, but she just does so much work and research and discussion about vulnerability, and that without vulnerability, we really don't have courage. And so we're going to talk about how we've been courageous, gotten more courageous by allowing a little bit of that vulnerability into our lives.
Yeah, and so I think that that's exactly right. So you've gotta be vulnerable so that you can take the next step. And I think that the trap that I know for me I fell into was, for vulnerability, I think for me, it was about relationships, right? So a marriage where there's a lot of anger and resentment on my part, I used that to almost fuel me, to give me energy. And so there's always a reason to be angry or mad. And so when that relationship finally ended, for me, I was in a place where I had to be courageous, first of all, to end the relationship. And secondly, to take it to be able to be open to having a new relationship. And how do I do that? I had to have courage. I had to have courage to do that. But how do you do that without vulnerability? And that was a huge thing for me, was to be honest with myself, to let the guard down, and to be vulnerable in a way that could make me be hurt. In order to have the courage to pursue something new and different. And so I think that's hard. It's hard for us as humans to put the guard down and to be vulnerable, but nothing is accomplished. You can't drive courage. You can't do courageous things until you're okay with knowing that there's a chance to get hurt. And I think for me, that has been huge in trying to proceed in a different relationship and in having new relationships in general. And how do we do that and allow ourselves to get hurt, but be courageous enough to take that next step?
Yeah, I think with me, I'm proud of myself for the courage I've had to change how I communicate with people. And so that's anything from within my marriage, with my supervisor at work, with family, friends. I've always been, most of my life, I was pretty shy and quiet and reserved. I'd say the last part of my life, I've not been as shy and quiet, but still holding back a little bit, not giving everything, not giving people a look at what is really going on inside of my mind and what I'm really feeling, and almost using like shutting down to get through things versus really talking through them and that kind of thing. And it takes trust of the other person. It takes opening yourself up to them not liking what you say, and it sort of reflecting that they don't like who you are deep down, if that comes to that. So like with me, it's just in the past, like if I was mad with my husband, he knew I was mad with him, but maybe you didn't know like the underlying reasons why that made me mad. And so I think over the last couple of years, I've done a better job at being able to calmly communicate and do it in a way where he understands a little bit more about me and why those things make me sad or angry or whatever, so that I'm giving him a little more insight into me and why, maybe something from childhood or something about the way I feel about myself or whatever. And it's a vulnerable space, but I feel like by taking the courage to do that, our relationship's so much stronger. And I feel better about what I've communicated because now he knows. And so he's not going to repeat that behavior because now he knows the deeper level of why it was even actually making me mad or sad.
And I think a lot of times, especially, at our ages, and, I think when we start to really, you can't get to this point, you can't get to vulnerability and to courage until you take a step back for a second and recognize past experiences, recognize past hurts, recognize where you did or did not push through with something, and have the courage in the past to do these things. A big key word that people are using, a buzzword nowadays, is triggers, right? What triggered us to act this way or be like that, or what triggers happen in a conversation or relationship that immediately changes that from what's going on right here to what happened in the past. And then being able to have the courage, being vulnerable enough to be honest about that trigger, about what we're talking about right now. Like maybe we're arguing and realizing that that argument really isn't about this, whatever this is. It is about the trigger from the past. So being able to be vulnerable with yourself and your past and identifying those past triggers, and then having the courage to let them go, to work through them, to think about them, to release them, and to allow them to continue to bubble up until you can. And you have to be vulnerable to do that, to allow a conversation to get to the point where you realize, okay, it's no longer about this conversation. It's about the past. How do I open myself up to that vulnerability? Because I need the courage to continue this conversation in a different way, or to not have this trigger again. How do I let it go so that I have the courage to move on?
Yeah, I think a big thing for me that helped me get there was when we learned, Jack Canfield does the formula E plus R equals O. Your event plus your response equals the outcome you're going to have. And in that, they talk about like the space between something happening and how you respond to it. And within that little space of time, we all tell ourselves a story. And that story is typically based on our past experiences, like you were saying, our patterns of behavior, all of that stuff. And so once I knew about the story, you know, that maybe I'm getting upset because I've told myself a story that is not what, like you say, not what's happening right here and now, but I've told a story and then I'm reacting to that versus what's really happening in the moment. And so that really was an eye-opening thing for me of, okay, what stories am I telling myself that I really do need to let go of? Because, you know, maybe it's past things before I even knew my husband, but now I'm holding him accountable for those past things that he didn't have anything to do with.
Yeah. And I think it's the courage to dig a little deeper, to not just play status quo, but to really identify what that is, having the courage to do that, the vulnerability to really look at it, and then address it so that you can move on. Vulnerability is not fun, especially for people like us, right? And it's tough. I mean, I grew up in a space where being vulnerable could have put me at risk for a lot of things. And so I closed myself off and had a wall constantly that I didn't ever bring down. Like it was how I kept myself safe, mentally, physically, emotionally safe, was putting up this wall. And the older I've gotten, and I carried that wall for years and years. And even now, when I have a new relationship, romantic or not, I enter in that relationship with still pieces of that wall in between me and that person. Now, the wall's a lot thinner, it's a lot shorter, but there is still that. And I have to remind myself that if I want this relationship, whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a friendship, if I want it to succeed, I have to be vulnerable and be willing to give what I have, the complete me, to this, or it's not a relationship that's worth having to me anymore. So if I'm not willing to be vulnerable and courageous enough to do that, then this is a relationship that's really of interest to me. And I've got to kind of remind myself of that.
Yeah, and I think what we're all about is trying to be better tomorrow than we are today.
Absolutely.
And I think without accepting that all that is about is changing for the better. And so if we're not courageous enough to do that, we're just going to stay stuck in the same old, which doesn't help us grow. It doesn't help us become better people, and it doesn't help us, serve others really. Right. And so it's an important thing. I think Brene Brown has been a champion for this message out there and really gotten it out to the forefront. But like look at it in your life. You know, what does that look like in your life? Because it's challenging work, but it's so fulfilling once you're able to get a little bit more courageous each time.
And I think the thing about her too is she is no nonsense. She's no bullshit. It is what it is. And she even talks about her experiences. And I think that when I hear her talk about her experiences and how she has had to practice this and how she doesn't always get it right either, I can see a lot of myself in what she talks about. You know, being a little bit, not bullying, but being a little bit prideful and being a little bit protective and being the rock and the person that's always got to be the leader, and then to be able to let that go and to actually feel the feelings, because she's so busy taking action versus just being a feeling. And that's probably a lot of where I come from too. And so to hear her talk about those things and know that she's a pioneer of some of this work, but she has some of the same issues that I do. If you haven't checked her out, she's amazing for sure.
Yeah. And as you were speaking, you know, it's challenging for us changing ourselves in that way and being courageous, but just think about the people that know us very well. It's probably challenging for them too, because it's like, wait a minute, who's this new person? Because she never spoken to me like that. She's never been that vulnerable. She's never been that bold. She's never been, the list goes on. And so, you know, it does change dynamics sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. Well, good. Well, hey, listen, we hope that you got something out of this message. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. We'd love to get this information out to as many people as possible. You know our story. If you don't, check some of our earlier videos. But Lori and I have been doing this work and really trying to just bring you nuggets of information that took us years to find. And hopefully this is helping somebody. We also have a YouTube, this is our YouTube channel. We've got a Facebook group called the Positive Vibe Tribe. Check us out there. We've got thousands of members. They're sharing just fun, positive nuggets every day. It's awesome. If you have any questions for us, we're happy to answer questions. You can email us at higher-navigation@gmail.com. So it's HIGHER navigation@gmail.com. And you can also check our website, which is highernavigation.com. So hopefully you got something out of this. Please share. We appreciate you guys taking time to watch us.